We have a packed schedule. We are thrilled to have Sangeet here. So I'll give a short introduction for those who may not be familiar with Sangeet. We'll then go into a moderated Q&A, which is for about 30 minutes. And we have two parts to that moderated Q&A. The book has so much rich information. So I'm a huge fan of the book and would highly recommend that you read the book for more context. But the two areas that we will focus on today, one is on company and product strategy, and that is about where to play and how to win when the system is changing. So we'll spend a few minutes there, and then we will spend the other part of the moderated Q&A on the individual part and answering or reviewing the question, will AI take my job? So we'll talk about those kind of issues in that 15 minutes. And then the remaining 20 minutes will be your Q&A. So to make sure that you have your Q&A done, I will drop a link to Slido, which is where we'll be reviewing questions. You can upvote questions, and I assume we'll have a lot more questions than time, so the upvotes matter. So please upvote questions. All right? So with that, let's go into the intro. And for those of you who don't know Sangeet, you should definitely have heard of The Platform Revolution. That was his first book, and his new book, Reshuffle. He was awarded the 2025 Thinkers 50 Strategy Award for the most impactful idea in the field of strategy. We'll be covering some of that in the first part. He has advised folks from pre-IPO to CEOs at Fortune 500 companies. He is currently a senior fellow at the University of California, Berkeley, and has presented at numerous global forums, including the World Economic Forum. He does very, very few of these open invite sessions, so we are privileged to have Sangeet with us today. Thank you, Sangeet.
Thank you, Randir. So excited to be here.
All right. We are thrilled to have you. So let's start at the top, Sangeet. You talk about company and product strategy, and you talk about where to play and how to win when the system itself is changing. I think we have all had situations where we have been asked to come up with an AI strategy for our team, an AI strategy for our company. And you say that that's one of the biggest mistakes because that is starting inside out. And yet we have all been on the receiving end of having to either create those AI strategy documents or review them and implement them. So help us understand why you say that this is the wrong question or the wrong artifact to produce.
Yeah, there are quite a few different threads over here, so I'll try to string them together to answer this question, right? So the first thing is that when we think about any new technology that comes in, our bias is to not really create strategy, but create action plans. How are we going to adopt this? And this worked in, this is a mindset that we're carrying from what I would call an industrial era. It's not a digital era mindset. A digital era mindset needs to be fundamentally different. And that is because if you look at where we are with AI today, I'll just trace that where we are is actually a place where, several previous shifts have changed how value is created and how companies compete and win. So when we talk about company strategy, corporate strategy, and again, product strategy is at the level of a specific product. But in both those cases, we're answering these two questions: where do we play and how do we win? In traditional markets, in the old industrial era, the idea of where do we play was simply which countries do we enter, which markets do we enter, who's our customer. Today, where do we play is fundamentally different because there are two or three aspects over here. The first is the fact that ever since we had the ability to digitize, ever since data could flow freely, you could capture data in one industry and move it into another industry. And so, insurance companies could go into the vehicle industry and health industry and vice versa. And so the idea of industry boundaries started collapsing. So where you play was no longer a choice that you had to make. It was something that you had to actively create because you had to decide, which industries do I want to enter? What's the scope of the customer problem that I want to solve? And in order to solve that entire scope of the problem, which components do I need to borrow from other industries? And data is only one of the aspects that kind of led us to it. The other is cloud-based modularization of services, microservices, APIs, essentially converting individual services into modules and making that accessible outside boundaries. And if you think of what AI is doing, the first thing that AI does to the playing field is that what we saw so far with data and cloud-based services was we looked at highly structured information and made it portable across industry boundaries. What AI does, and especially generative AI, is that it takes what we have so far considered tacit information. It processes language and hence it's able to extract value from tacit information, and it makes that exportable beyond industry boundaries, which essentially means that knowledge that used to be locked inside a certain industry because it was logged in the heads of people or then files and documents that was inside those companies can now be accessible, across industry boundaries. So the first thing is the playing field is available for you to shape as you want to because of this fundamental shift. The second thing that happens with AI again is that how you win changes as well, because whenever we talk about digital in general and AI in particular, we are always locked up in this mindset of we're going to an abundance economy. And when we go to an abundance economy, we're going to solve the world's problems. Everything is going to be abundant. We'll get to UBI. The whole point is that that's not how economics works. The economy has always worked on competing on what is scarce. And so when we move into a world where execution becomes abundant, where not just information, but the applicability of information, the fact that you don't have to open 20 tabs on a browser, but can get a deep research report, the fact that applicable knowledge becomes abundant and execution becomes abundant, in a world where that happens, what becomes scarce is verification. And I'm not going to use broad words like trust, but verification, which is this true? Validation, which is, have you created something and does that meet what was needed? So is that are you solving the right matching problem for the or have you created the right solution for the problem? So validation. And essentially governance becomes important because when everybody can create new things and we are getting into an increasingly interconnected world, risks multiply. So I'm happy to go through examples from a whole range of industries where if you look at what happened with the SaaS era, we built hyper-focused execution tools. And now as we went into the space where increasingly with AI, we have to think about really solving these problems as execution becomes more and more abundant. So that's those are the two pieces that I would talk about. One, you have the ability to change the nature of the playing field, where you play, which industries you enter in, because knowledge can be brought in and recombined across areas which were not possible in the past. And secondly, you can't compete on the basis of execution. You can't compete on the basis of selling tools. You have to think about where the new scarcity lies. And so these are the two key aspects. I think the third piece that I'll just say is that unlike a lot of previous technologies, the smartphone, for instance, the cloud, these technologies hit industries once and they reshaped industries. But because AI constantly improves and because the rate of improvement at the AI model layer is much faster than the rate of improvement at the solution layer where those models are being applied, whether it's a professional services firm or whether it's a materials manufacturing firm which needs to rapidly generate new compounds using AI. Because that rate of evolution is so different, the playing field changes much faster on that basis as well. So those are the two aspects. I'm happy to go, click deeper into these things, but I just wanted to kind of set that out there to set a frame.
Yeah, that's super helpful, Sangeet. So, yeah, while we often talk about this being similar to the internet revolution or mobile revolution, your point is that yes, and it's much more significant because the rate of change, not just when it started, but as it continues to evolve, is much faster and the impacts are much wider.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to hear an example from you on what you've seen when a leadership team is actually thinking systems first instead of task first. And we've seen a lot of examples, even in the chat, where we're using AI, and we all love it for, I'd say, what is really a task first stuff, right? Summarization, brainstorming, etc. Those are all awesome, but I think in your model are still task first. So can you give
Yep.
us a couple of examples of where people have, in your opinion, done a good job of using AI in the systems first? point.
Yeah, I think, I'll take examples that a lot of us can relate with because we know those companies out there. So, but I want to really peel apart what's unique about those examples. I talk about two of these examples in the book as well. So maybe I'll start over there. So the first is that when you think about the system, you are, you're talking about the impact. We're essentially saying that AI does not simply change individual tasks, because today when we think about the impact of AI, we constantly look at, do we have a PhD in our pocket, do we have a fifth grader in our pocket? It's all about intelligence. And when we think about intelligence, we naturally think about, can it do this particular task? And that's why, the AI distraction, and the people who play down AI will share pictures of maps that are not being drawn well, and number of hours in Strawberry, etc., which completely misses the point. And that's because we're rooted in that task-centric mindset. But the impact of AI happens at least three different levels. It changes not just the tasks, it changes the logic of the workflows, because workflows in our organizations are structured to achieve certain goals, and they're not structured as a sequence of tasks. They're structured in a way to achieve certain goals, and they are primarily structured around what's scarce today. So if there's a certain kind of expertise that is scarce and captured within the organization, your workflows are structured around protecting that expertise. But if that expertise becomes commoditized, you don't start speeding up the task. You have to reimagine your workflows. If as a consulting firm, your market analysis piece has now become commoditized because anybody can run it, your client can run it on ChatGPT and so on, you don't start speeding it up internally. You then have to reimagine your workflow with the assumption that if this gets commoditized, where does value move? And hence, how can we restructure a workflow around protecting that new value? So the first thing is, it's not tasks, it's workflows. The second thing is, workflows themselves are set up in a certain organizational context. So the way organizations value capabilities and how organizations structure change as well. And then finally, the way companies compete, or the basis of competition in the industry changes. So with that, let me get to these two examples. I'll talk about how to think about the basis of competition, and then how to think about workflows and jobs and organizational systems. A very simple example in my mind is just what happened with social networking. So this is before generative AI. Social networking in the mid 2010s, it was sort of decided that the whole logic of a social network was that you needed to get people on board your product, and they would have to connect with others and build up a social graph, whether one-sided or two-sided. And once the social graph was built, it was not portable. You prevented it from being ported, and hence you had really high lock-in effects. This whole logic was kind of appended by TikTok, because TikTok essentially created a social network without needing a social graph in the first place, because it essentially, it did not just use AI, it changed the product architecture around the capabilities of AI. AI mobile first, the fact that you had the 60-second time window, and the fact that every single gesture or swipe, pause, etc. on a mobile could be recorded. All of that helped it develop a behavior graph, which helped it sidestep the social graph and helped it populate your feed, even if you did not follow anybody. So the traditional social networks, they also had access to the same technology. If they were building an AI strategy, they were trying to layer AI onto their existing logic of, we need to improve the feeds, we need to make recommendations better. But the fundamental logic of how you compete, which is on the basis of a social graph, did not change. And TikTok changed the logic of competition. So that's the first thing, when you think about AI coming in as a new technology, you have to think about, how do you rethink the logic of competition. I'll go to the workflow side and take a different example. We often think about Adobe versus Figma. And again, this happened before AI, but this becomes such an important example today because Adobe was a very successful digital transformation example, an incumbent that adopted the cloud, that moved from selling licenses to selling subscriptions, which many incumbents failed at. And yet they constantly struggled against Figma. And a lot of people say, well, it's because Figma allows you to do collaboration. But that's only the surface symptom. The real reason Adobe struggles against Figma is not that. The real reason Adobe struggles against Figma is that it restructured the workflow by restructuring the unit of work. The unit of work in the case of Adobe is the file. So and the customer is the designer. So a designer makes changes to the file gets fully changed and then gets sent to somebody else, and then they have to provide revisions on that and feedback on that. And then again, there's version control and all of those aspects. Everything happens at the level of a file. Figma is cloud first. Just like TikTok is AI first, Figma is cloud first, which means that it reimagined the workflow around the fact that on the cloud you could reference specific elements in a file as individual objects. And on the face of it, it sounds very academic, but there are three very important implications that happen when you are able to start managing work at the level of elements in a design file versus at the level of a file. The first thing is that when any change is made to a particular design, it propagates across the entire organization. So you don't have to struggle with version control. And because the cloud allows everybody to connect, you don't need really high processing capacity on your own computers. So design is an input into product, sales, marketing workflows. All of those can be then managed around Figma. So you're no longer solving the design problem, you're solving the workflow problem. But that's the obvious effect. The second and more important effect is that when you can manage individual elements, you can manage them as shared libraries and govern them at organization-wide scale. So as I mentioned, even with AI, when execution becomes easy, governance will become even more important. And we already see that happening in the Figma example, where when everybody can start providing inputs and start making, start working on a design file, you need to ensure governance, but you also need to ensure that you have reusability across the organization. So the entire workflow was reimagined around the capabilities of the cloud in the case of Figma. The third thing that happens, which is probably least visible, is that even if Adobe integrates with, Adobe and Figma, even if they open out their API and work with the same partners in the ecosystem, the level at which those partners can access capabilities inside the software are very different, because in the case of Adobe, the partner can integrate into the file. In the case of Figma, the partner can integrate into actually the element level. So the types of innovation that partners can do by connecting into Figma's APIs is also fundamentally different. So the key point I'm trying to make over there is that when the unit of work changes, you are able to restructure workflows completely. And with that, the way your partner ecosystem is structured, the way you compete completely changes. And this becomes especially important with AI, because just like Figma moved work from the file to the element, AI allows work to be moved from fully bundled workflows to specific tasks within that particular workflow, because every single task can be now made available as as a component that can be performed by a machine, for instance. So you can restructure workflows accordingly. And I'll just maybe close this with a final example over here, which is the example of the Chinese fast fashion company Shein. Traditional fashion companies, they work in a very linear model. So there's somebody who goes to Tokyo or Milan, and they sense what's happening in the market. Based on that, they release a fall or a winter collection, and then the whole batch production hits the market, and then you again go into this long cycle. And what Shane did again is interesting in the sense that they reorganized the workflow, the organization, and with that, the entire logic of competition. What Shane does is it constantly senses data from social media, identifies micro trends, doesn't wait for big trends, and then it uses that micro trend to get a very small batch of production done, which it then, sorry, there's somebody whose mic is not on mute. So they put out this they put out this small batch of production in the market. They test it in the market, and through that they refine their view on which designs are working and which ones are not working. And all of this is done because they algorithmically coordinate third-party factories to run these small batches, test them in the market, and then through that keep algorithmically improving their sense on which designs are working. So what we see here is an AI-first organization actually embeds learning at every level. It's not just at the level of the customer interface, it's at the level of the entire supply chain, the entire operations. So I just want to kind of throw these 3 points here. AI changes how you can compete, the logic of competition. AI changes the logic on which workflows are structured, and AI changes the nature of the organization on the basis of which you compete.
Yeah, that was super helpful, Sangeet, on what is the element of work. And I think we'll eventually get to it even for the individual level, because that makes a difference on where, when you talk about jobs, etc., we'll come back to that. So where do you compete on the element? What's the basic element or building block of your company? And then all the way up to the company strategy, making sure that that flows all the way up.
Right.
And those were good examples of Figma for what is the element, as well as Sheen using data all the way through and incorporating it rapidly, as well as TikTok, which completely upended what it means to be a social network and challenged what the moat of a social network and lock-in meant versus
Yeah.
social graph versus the interest graph. So let's move to a slightly different area. So you talk a lot about tools improve tasks and engines reshape systems. And I think this was a great example of AI reshaping the system and really bringing TikTok to the forefront.
Hmm.
So, however, when the solution and the performance of the solution or this engine depends on an external entity, right? Primarily the LLM, you
Yeah.
also talk about how the power and margin shifts. And I was thinking about your book when I read the news in the last 24 hours about OpenAI has opened a waitlist for healthcare, right? So
Yep.
now you can sign up and you can upload your medical records, etc., and get info directly from them. So there, it has so many implications. Just that I'm using that as an example, but of how do you, as a solution provider, which many of us on this call are, think about incorporating an LLM or incorporating a partner. So the traditional build versus buy. And I think there you have that key question of what happens if you lose access to this tool? Is it an
Yeah.
inconvenience or is it catastrophic? Right? But also, you've now got this other element of the tool provider, in this case, OpenAI, is also looking at moving into the turf of solution providers, as they've done here. So how does a solution provider, you have to use this, but it's a common capability that any one of your competitors can also use. And then you've also got to balance this risk, as we've seen, of the platform provider or the tool provider coming into a solution provider's space. So how do solution providers navigate this fast changing and risky proposition?
Yeah. I mean, I'll start by saying that there are certain cases where um, the tool provider is such a good solution provider as well that you have very little scope to compete, right? And the classic case that I use also in the book is the role that mapping has played, because Uber is the solution provider and Google Maps is the tool provider that provides the mapping capability for Uber. But then Google Maps, Alphabet now has Waymo, which is also a solution provider. And so when a tool provider gets into becoming a solution provider as well, the challenge is much higher. The same thing happened with the other mapping providers and Google launching the smartphone, with Android. So keeping that part aside, um, first you need to really look at, are you even playing in a space where the tool provider has become a very credible solution provider and is difficult to compete with? How do you sense that? Typically tool providers compete on the basis of performance. So how good is the answer, how accurate is the answer? But solution providers compete on the basis of reliability. Is the solution accurate 100% of the time? If not, if it's accurate 98% of the time, am I going to bear the risk for the remaining 2%? And bearing risk, shows up in different ways. Bearing risk shows up on your, books, either in the form of higher margin that you capture to account for it, or in the form of warranties that you offer. So the question comes back to who bears the risk if something goes wrong, right? In order for in order for you to bear that risk, you're typically looking, you're again talking about mm, uh, cases where the customer of the solution provider has very low tolerance to you know, something going wrong. So that's one way in which you can think about, as a solution provider competing with a tool provider, figuring out ways in which you can quantify that risk. So effectively, you have to become sort of an insurance company, and then bundle that risk absorbing solution with your business. But the third way I would say is think about it in the case where risk in itself is not the primary factor. You are a solution provider. Tools are getting better, and the classic example is consulting firms and chat gpt, right? So if you look at consulting firms have competed on the basis of several different factors. There are certain firms which are compete on the basis of relationships. So they may not have the best brains, but they are really deeply embedded relationships. If you think of those players, if you're already competing on the basis of relationships and not performance on the solution, and now you've got a tool that's getting better and better, and your relationship is hard to dislodge, then you actually become stronger with this. On the other hand, if you had a consulting firm that was primarily billing on the basis of the expertise, the unique expertise that it had, and now suddenly that gets commoditized to some extent because of a tool coming in, the effect is not the end of consulting. The effect is not the end of jobs, but the effect certainly is margin compression, because there's only so much margin in the value chain. Margin compression happens either because the customer starts using the tool directly, and so they don't provide that part of the margin to you; they protect it for themselves, or it happens because the tool provider realizes they're critical to your business, and so they start charging higher at the bottom. So margin compression happens one way or the other. So of all the scenarios we talked about, this is actually the most difficult one, because in this case, the only way in which you can protect yourself is you have to actively think about, where is value moving now? How do I work with the assumption that my existing business is becoming commoditized? I just want to call out a subtle distinction over here. There's a distinction between commoditization of your business and self cannibalization of your business. And a very easy way to think about it is what happened with the iPhone. When Apple created the iPhone, the iPod became an app on the iPhone. A lot of people said that this is Steve Jobs cannibalizing the iPod business, but that's not really the case. What Steve Jobs was really doing was he started building the iPhone in 2000, because when he launched the iPod, he started creating value in the iPod, but also in iTunes and in the library of songs that was created alongside it, and then the user base. When the iPhone was created, the iPod, the device got commoditized, but all the value in the iTunes library and the user base was moved onto the iPhone on day one. And so they were able to move that value when the underlying centerpiece got commoditized. So even as a consulting firm company, you have to think about, how do we reimagine where we move value once our centerpiece gets commoditized, because the same capabilities are available to everybody out there. So thinking about commoditization is very important. So those are the four scenarios I would think about: solution provider versus tool provider.
That was helpful, and I think certainly something that we're all experiencing. So looking for what's the risk of getting it wrong. So the accuracy, what's the risk that a solution provider can cover and kind of guarantee or ensure, to use your word. And you also talk in your book about how you can price for outcomes. So different ways that you can protect and handle what the user wants, which is ultimately they want a guaranteed solution, and how you price your solution and package your solution for that, which might be harder for a tool provider to do. But there's certainly encroachment and margin compression for sure that we're all facing. I want to move now to our second part, which I know is on the minds of many of our people here on the call, which is, as an individual professional, what is the individual impact for me and my job? And I know that we see this question very often, which is, will AI take my job? And you are very assertive in your book that that's a simple question, and people like simple questions because you can have a simple answer. But in your opinion, that's the wrong question. So I'd love for you to explain why you think what's a better question? And more importantly, how do we as professionals look to your book and the frameworks there to plan for the future? How do we skate to where the puck is going and make sure that even if we reskill, we're reskilling for what new opportunities emerge versus the things that are getting compressed?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I've thought a lot about because there was a point at which I just got tired of, going to dinners and always hearing AI won't take your job, but someone using AI will. In some way, that line was the trigger for me to write this book. I was always going to write a strategy book. I had not thought of, bringing the jobs issue in as well. But actually, a lot of the frames that we talked about for strategy apply in the case of jobs as well. The first thing that I would say is, will AI take my job? That's not the right question. The right question is, why does my job exist in the first place today? Ask yourself, always, this is, we're going through a time where we have to question every single assumption. If we assume anything and take it for granted, we are going to miss out on the ability to rethink it. So ask yourself first why the job exists in the first place. Let me give an example, which I give in the book. So when the word processor was invented, and I looked through a lot of historical examples, this is probably the best example to think about how AI changes the job. When the word processor was invented, typists, initially typists would have been told the word processor won't take your job, but someone using a word processor will. So start using the word processor. And when we think about the job of a typist, we again fall into this fallacy of tasks. We think that it's about the task of typing. The problem is that when the word processor came out, the task of typing never got automated. We still type today, but the job of the typist went away. So automation is not the enemy. I mean, automation might take some jobs, but thinking about how good is AI and what can it do, and hence which jobs can it automate, is completely missing the point. The typists lost their jobs because of simple economics. The typist job existed because the real constraint in the system, the highest cost, point of highest cost in the system, was not typing, it was editing. And because editing was expensive before the word processor, you needed highly skilled typists so that the rate of edits went down. You did not have to edit that often. The moment the word processor came in, the cost of editing dramatically collapsed because you could just hit a delete button and continue typing. And with that, the value of good typing went away. Typing was no longer valued as a high value skill. So this is my point about how you value capabilities, because when the constraint changes because of new technology, how companies value capabilities will change. So companies that had typists no longer value typing because typing was now everybody's job. So there was no job of a typist anymore, not because the task went away, but because the value of that task fell down with the constraint that they were managing going away. And that's really how I think about our jobs today. Our jobs are not about the task. Well, there are certain things, if your job was only translation and AI can automatically translate, yes, automation plays a role there. But for most knowledge workers, our jobs are much more complex, and they are not structured around the task. They're structured around certain constraints that the organization is trying to manage. So ask yourself, what is the assumption based on which your job exists in the first place, right? And does that assumption go away with AI? And if that assumption goes away, how else should you reimagine your job? And in order to reimagine your job, you have to look for the new constraint. You have to see what's breaking down. And a couple of examples that I use in the book, when SaaS tools exploded, before the explosion of SaaS tools, we did not have hyper specialized tools for individual enterprise functions. But with the explosion of SaaS tools, for example, customer journey management, we had hyper specialized sales CRM tools, we had specialized marketing tools, analytics tools, customer support tools. And so the tools got better, execution got better, but the ability to manage customer revenue across these siloed teams became more and more difficult. And hence, a new job was created, not because AI could or could not do something, but because AI broke this coordination between these different functions. And so the new job, revenue operations or DevOps, was created exactly for this reason. DevOps was created for a similar reason, a similar coordination breakdown. So you have to look at what is the new constraint. And typically, the old constraint in the knowledge economy was knowledge is scarce. If you go to Harvard for 4 years and you come out and join a company where those skills are valued and you're trained even further, you're continuing to capture that scarce knowledge. So to the extent that the knowledge you have continues to remain scarce, your capabilities might be valued, but if the knowledge is no longer scarce, or more importantly, the application of that knowledge is no longer scarce, it's accessible, you will either become commoditized, you'll either have that task get automated or margin compressed, it'll get commoditized. So in both those cases, you have to look for the new constraint. As I mentioned, think of your job as being you being a solution provider. The tools are there. If you are a solution provider, you have to bear the risk associated with it. How do you price that risk into your job? How do you guarantee your ability to manage that risk? If coordination breaks down between different functions because everybody is using tools now, how do you manage that coordination better? So reimagine your job on that basis. The simplest rule of thumb I would just say is this. I say this because I practice it as well. And I think it's extremely important for all of us to do this. If the playing field is constantly changing, we cannot simply keep adopting AI tools. We have to, every time we have to take a step back and ask ourselves, 1 year from now, what do we bet the playing field for our job is going to be like? And what do we bet is going to be valued, which is how we win? What is going to be valued 1 year from now? And hence, what is our job going to look like? Bet on that, work towards that. AI is improving every month. The landscape around us is shifting every month. So keep reviewing what you have bet on and keep refining that. But unless you sort of quote unquote future cast and work backwards from there, you'll just be adopting tools without a direction. You need that direction.
I love that question. I know it's a hard question, but an important one. Why does your job exist? And in a sense, what you're saying, Sangeet, is the same principles that you applied for that earlier for the company and product strategy, which is what's the value that you're delivering, is ones that we should ask ourselves as professionals. What value are my skills delivering or my job delivering today? And with every system or every evolution you talk about, there's new constraints that are emerging, right? And that will
Right.
emerge. The constraint just moves. AI solves a coordination problem today, but it might introduce other constraints in the system. So even if we're thinking 1 year ahead, what are some of those constraints that we see evolving, and how do we reskill and show our value in solving that constraint with that set of skills? All right, so I had so many more questions for you, but I do want to make sure that we have a chance for our audience to ask questions. So I'm going to switch over to this view so you can see the upvoted questions. And I think some of this, you may want to just give some examples, Sangeet, because some of these are issues that you have talked about, which is how should people think about their career path going forward, right? And I know you talked about a fast-changing landscape and looking out 1 year. So I don't know how you would suggest we look at a longer horizon.
Yeah, I think the fundamental thing is that um, AI is sort of accelerating a direction we were already heading in, which is this idea that institutions will not take care of your career, and that you will not have a single bundled career. You'll have a portfolio career. You'll have multiple avenues and multiple ways in which you build career capital in different aspects, and then pull it back in. One of the key things one of the key framings that I use in the book is skills are important, but don't overemphasize skills. What's more important is the unique positioning and unique bundle that you bring to the table. And this probably has maybe nothing to do with AI as well, but Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, has this very, very powerful observation that it's extremely difficult to be in the top 1% on one skill, but it's very easy to be in the top 1% of two completely unconnected skills, which somehow when you bring together and solve a customer problem is highly valued. So the fact that he could bring cartoons and humor with office politics was a unique intersection. And I think that's there are 2 points over there. One is the intersection is unique, but the second is that the value is not in the individual skill. The value is in the bundle. An example I give in the book as well is what happened to magicians when YouTube and Google happened, because magic is an example of a skill which is very hard to acquire, and so the only way you can monetize it is by protecting the secret. The moment the secret is known, the wonder of magic is lost. So today with YouTube, etc., the secret gets deconstructed instantly. which is why today magicians don't compete on skill and secret anymore. They compete on spectacle. They tell great, stories. They use the same old skills. They'll bring in technology. They'll bring in some interesting spectacle. It's no longer the skill in your hands. It's the spectacle that you're bringing in, and in a way, that's why you have Penn and Teller foolers and things of this sort, because magic as a way to actually fool on the basis of skill is gone. It's the spectacle. So spectacle is really a new bundle. You're bundling other things, and you're bundling them together because of narrative, because you're stringing that story together. So I would say that, as uh, as somebody who is thinking about your career, the most important thing is to, I would say, in order, the single most important thing is always think outside in. Always think, how is the landscape changing? How is the playing field changing? How is your job changing? What are adjacent things coming up? You might never have wanted to, you might never have thought a certain type of skill was relevant to your job, but now that you combine it with what you do and you create a unique solution, maybe there's a market for that. So always look for what's happening, what are new ways that people are innovating. What AI provides you is, whether you work at a company or not, you are a solopreneur because you have access to what in the past required huge teams to be hired. You can now fire up a prompt and get what would have typically needed a team to do in the past. And so you have access to these capabilities. How do you use that? So the first thing is, think about the landscape. Think about how you will, use whatever is available as open building blocks out there, but then think about how you will bundle them together into a fundamentally new form of solution. And I talk about this, in many parts of my work. When access to answers becomes cheap, the value is not in answers. The value is in asking the right questions, because it sounds like, it sounds vague and sounds like a truism or whatever. But my point is that when answers become cheap, when execution becomes cheap, the biggest cost is not the cost of building stuff. The biggest cost is the cost of building the wrong stuff, because that's the opportunity cost. You can spend all your time doing things that don't matter and that are going to be commoditized anyway. So ask yourself, what's the right thing to focus on? What are the right things that I should be? And the only way you can do that is by constantly having this outside in view on your career, and thinking of yourself as a solopreneur, whether you run a one-man business or not.
Yeah, I think that's certainly helpful, and I don't think we have a choice because things are changing so fast. I want to stay on this theme of the individual and the individual professional. I think Harsha in one question said, will our use and maybe over reliance of use, whether it's Cloud Code or ChatGPT or whatever, is that making us dumber?
Mm-hmm.
And related to that is, what roles or jobs will remain after companies repackage all this valuable work using, let's call it Gen AI?
Yeah, I mean, on the first count, I would say that you know it is making us it is going to make us dumber, just like we ended up becoming less muscular when we stopped doing physical work because tools got automated. So it very much has the capacity to make us dumber, unless we actively figure out what is the workflow where we leverage all of this stuff, but we don't take the thinking away from us. Right. I mean, if you go onto LinkedIn, you realize that you're effectively chatting with a chatbot. Because people have, it's not AI slop, it's human slop. People have not done the hard work of generating and then actually going in and editing. And so that, if you do not do the hard work before and after, the hard work earlier used to be getting to the answer. The hard work now is deciding what to answer, and then once you generate all the possible answers, do a lot of brainstorming, choosing what combination of that answer uniquely answers the question as such. So my point is, if you outsource the thinking capability to AI, not so much the thinking on the task, but the thinking on the end-to-end problem solving, the workflow. If you do not have that control, then you're in a way, you're sort of lost. I always think of, um, when people talk about the fact that writing has become easy or movie making has become easy. The whole point is that the value in writing and movie making was not in generating text. There's this, I think Ernest Hemingway quote, which is all writing is rewriting. The whole point was in getting it better, curating it. The whole point in movie making was in in direction and editing. So if you lose control of that, yeah, and you outsource that to AI, that I think that's where the problem is. So there's no simple solution to this. The solution is simply this: figure out what the workflow is for you. Don't avoid AI tools, happily embrace them, get them more into your workflow, but figure out what's the best way by which you still control the directorial capabilities on that workflow. So I think that's the most important thing. The second question, I forgot what the second question was.
No, I think you got both of them. It's like one
Okay.
was, would it make us dumber? And then the other was related to the use of it. So
Yep.
moving slightly to an area that I think we have, many of us are experiencing, is most of us are not in these newer AI first companies. We are in what we'll call legacy companies.
Right.
So
Right.
what are some specific actionable things that leaders and that we can all do in those legacy companies to not just survive, but thrive with this new capability? Because
Yeah.
I think, at least reading your book and things, I had a somewhat negative impression of legacy companies being like, are we screwed? Because that element in the Adobe case, that element is hard to change, which is it's a file versus an element, right?
Yeah.
So is that broadly true, or should we be thinking of it differently? But we want to thrive, not just survive with this new capability as a legacy company.
Yeah, I think, as a legacy company, there are multiple reasons legacy companies fail. And very often we take the simple path out and we say that legacy companies fail because they are slow. They are not innovative. They have a culture that kills, innovation. And that is a big part of it. But I would say that there are two other very important factors because of which legacy companies fail. First, legacy companies fail because they are architecturally constrained. So Adobe is an example of an architecturally constrained company. It simply cannot go into the element level without fundamentally deconstructing its whole business. So it certainly cannot do that in its main business. It could potentially do that outside it, but then it would moving the value from the main business to the new business would be nearly impossible. That's a challenge that we've seen with innovation all through. But the second and more avoidable reason, and that's what I would focus on, the second and more avoidable reason why legacy companies fail is not because they don't adopt technology, but because they adopt it in the wrong frame. And so they get really good at playing the wrong game. They get exceptionally good at playing the wrong game. A lot of people say that, Kodak invented the digital camera, but then it failed. And that was because of culture. Well, the point is that Kodak invented the digital camera in 1975 or something. By 2000, it had done everything right to become a digital camera manufacturer. And by 2006, it was the number one digital camera manufacturer in the US. It had the largest digital printing business. It was no longer in the films printing business as well. The reason it failed was because the game was no longer about printing. The iPhone came out, and you no longer needed to print photos; you could view photos, and so the value shifted to viewing and sharing photos, and hence we had Instagram eventually. There was no way for Kodak to go down that path if it did not fundamentally rethink its game from the scratch, right? And so that's one of the key reasons legacy companies fail, because they keep playing the old game. If I stick onto the Kodak example, a company that did not fail, one way to avoid failure is to do it sort of inside out by just saying, what do we do really well, and can we continue doing it somewhere else? So Fujifilm, which was facing the same disruption, decided that it had never been a camera company. It was fundamentally a chemistry company. Kodak was also a chemicals company. It had an R&D division of 1,000 people, all of whom were chemistry people. None of them were social network and cloud people, right? And so Fujifilm essentially said that the camera playing field is gone. What are other playing fields where the same chemistry applies? So they took the same chemistry, moved into pharmaceuticals, moved into cosmetics, and so they essentially did a capability first shift. A similar thing is happening with AI today with companies like Shutterstock, for instance, because a company like Shutterstock was structured on the assumption that high quality photos are scarce, and high quality photos that meet your marketing team's goals, etc., are scarce. But with AI, you can generate high quality photos that exactly meet your goals, which you don't have to, run through a human tagged large base of digital photos, and all of it is free. So if you look at Shutterstock, it's facing sort of a Kodak moment. So to some extent, what Shutterstock is doing today is instructive of how legacy companies should approach it. You need to really think through your entire value chain. What, you know, across your entire value chain, how are the fundamental assumptions about your business changing? First, the very fact that photos are scarce or high quality photos are scarce, that assumption changes. But secondly, um, over the last 10 years, Shutterstock had already started moving from consumer to enterprise and had realized that in enterprise, the value is not so much in getting access to photos, but in governing digital rights of photos so that you are using it consistently and you're managing all the digital rights accordingly. And so the way they're positioning themselves is, first, they're trying to become the custodian of digital rights for the enterprise in a world where anybody can generate a photo. If somebody has generated a photo internally, how do you then manage the rights associated with it? How do you ensure that you essentially have a combined workflow that manages both human created photos with the rights and that manages AI created photos in one single workflow. So they've realized that the new constraint has moved to governance. So I would say, there are these two different ways in which you approach the strategy problem as a legacy company. You either look internally, and this is really the corner case. It's really the minority where you look internally and say, where else can we play, because we already have these capabilities. Or you look externally and you ask yourself, if the fundamental assumptions about our business are changing, how can we rethink what our business should be? Where in the value chain should we be playing? If we are playing in creating these vast sets of photos, now we need to move towards creating these governance layers for enterprises. And again, the reason I like the Shutterstock example is they've taken sort of an ecosystem approach to it, where they also ensure that creatives or photographers who were contributing to them, when their photos are being used by an OpenAI, etc., they're getting a share of the profits back or a share of the loyalty back. So thinking about that, about how you position yourself in the whole system, becomes really important. I'll just close this by sharing a simple framework of how I think about this. Whenever we think about our businesses are the bundle of different assumptions. They are a bundle of different positions across the value chain. You have to first unbundle that. You have to ask yourself, what are the various components of our business? Why are they structured together in this particular way? Which parts of our business are valuable and which parts are being cross subsidized? What are we providing for free so that people come on board, and where are we charging value? And you then ask yourself, with AI coming in, which of these assumptions still holds? And you then reassign value across those various components of your business. And then you ask yourself, how do I rebundle so that the new value can be protected? So this idea of unbundling, rebundling, which is the central framework of the book, is really important.
So, and in an ideal world, and I think that showed up in both the Fuji and the Shutterstock example, you look through the existing value map, but then you try to find your own capabilities, or at least core capabilities or adjacent capabilities, and the new market demand, and try to make that work, right? That seems to be the common theme. And how do you rebundle, unbundle maybe what you are doing currently, and rebundle with that new set of skills and tasks that have value in that new world.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. So I know we are close to time. Let's see if we can squeeze in one quick question. You have covered, I think, in some shape or form, some of the questions that are at the top in terms of how to map the current workflows, etc. So I'm trying to pick something that we have not touched on. All right, so let's take this one because I think many of us feel this, which is, if you had to prioritize what would be the AI tools or concepts that you would learn? Because, like you said, things are changing so fast, and the pace of change is only accelerating. More capabilities, more providers, etc. So, how would you suggest that people for whom keeping up with AI is not their full-time job make sure that they do prioritize, but yet focus on the most important or impactful things?
Yeah, uh, I think the first thing is don't get distracted by the tools because it's easy to get lost in the flood and keep trying out new tools. Um, deeply and I mean really deeply question your workflows. Try to understand why you do what you do. Um, to a large extent, you could use AI to help you question your workflows as well. I mean, the more you describe it, the more it can be a thought partner helping you question your workflows. And frankly, if I have to think about tools, first think about what I'm trying to achieve. Where am I getting constrained? For instance, if you're running your own business and for some reason your ability to send new proposals to clients is becoming a bottleneck, and if that's a constraint, I would then start thinking about how do I reimagine how I go about this. I'm taking a very tactical and simple example, but the point is, I would first think about what are the different ways in which I could either eliminate the need for sending those proposals, or I could standardize it, or I could create a mechanism by which an agent could rapidly generate the proposal by looking at the company's context, my last auto conversation with them, and a standard template that is there. So I would think about those different ways in which this can be done. Again, I always use ChatGPT as a thought partner to think about all of these things. And then I use, whether it's whatever is your AI tool of choice, use that to also ask which AI tools will then solve the new workflow that we're coming up with. So I don't like taking a tool first approach towards this because you're kind of going to get lost. You have to take a value first approach. What's right for your business or your career? What are you trying to achieve? Where's that getting stuck? How would you reimagine the workflow? I mean, simple workflow reimagining. There's very simple frameworks for that, right? Automate, eliminate, delegate. Think about it from that perspective and really think about uh, you know once you identified that, think about which tool can fit in where and how you're going to use it, because um, AI tools are very weird superpowers, right? They can either be just generators of slop or they can be really, really powerful. It depends on how you integrate them into your workflow towards your goal. So that's how I would go about it. But I would say uh, all of this thinking, you can frankly use AI to be a thought partner. I think that's where it's most powerful. The more you use AI as a thought partner, the better you become at using AI as a thought partner. And I think that's the one single compounding benefit that you can keep benefiting from.
Great. Well, Sangeet, we are at time. Thank you so, so much for making us one of your few open events. We are thrilled to have you. Folks on the call, please grab that URL. Please give feedback. Sangeet wants it. We at Sidebar want it. Thank you for coming. And we hope that this has been useful both to you personally and not ask the question of, will I take my job, but make sure that we understand where the constraint is moving to and rebundle our skills for that, and then back at your company to help with product and company strategy, even at legacy companies, to win in this exciting new world that we're in. Thanks again, Sangeet. Thank you,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
wonderful day.